During the Second World War, most Ukrainians fought against the Germans. However, some Ukrainians joined the Axis during the Second World War. Why was this? Since the Germans considered the Slavic people, among which the Ukrainians, as inferior and treated them as such. There are different reasons for Ukrainian collaboration, and in this video we're going to explore these. Keep watching. Good to have you back on the channel. If you happen to be new on this channel, I'm Stefan, I'm a Dutch history teacher, and I make videos about history for you. If you find it interesting, consider subscribing and also hit that notification bell. Around 220,000 Ukrainians fought for the Germans. On the flip side, 4.5 million Ukrainians served in the Red Army. So make no mistake here, most Ukrainians fought against the Nazis. But those who fought for the Axis, what were their motivations? In this video we're going to explore the reasons why they collaborated with the Germans. When the Second World War came around, Ukraine had a troublesome history to say the least. The Ukrainian War of Independence and a broader conflict named the Russian Civil War was won by the Bolsheviks, the Reds. Communist rule in Ukraine in the 1920s became lenient and Ukrainian culture was allowed to flourish. That ended when Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin rose to power. In the 1930s, he created a man-made famine in which millions of Ukrainians perished. In the same decade, many Ukrainians fell victim to Stalin's Great Purge. Ukrainian nationalism was the most prevalent in the western part of the country, which was part of the Second Polish Republic. In 1929, the ultranationalist Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN, saw the light of day, which called for an independent Ukraine and lived by the slogan, Ukraine for Ukrainians. The OUN started operating in eastern Galicia, then part of interwar Poland. The OUN saw violence as a legitimate means and carried out assassination attempts. Polish politicians were targeted, but also moderate Ukrainians. They also carried out acts of sabotage, and this provoked the Polish pacification of 1930, where Ukrainian villages were come to weed out Ukrainian nationalism. Because of this, the OUN radicalized even more. 1939 was also the year that the Second Polish Republic ceased to exist. On the 1st of September, the Germans invaded Poland, starting the Second World War. On the 17th of September, the Soviets invaded Poland from the east, and Poland was carved up by Nazi Germany and the USSR, as agreed upon by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was signed 1 month earlier. And so, Ukraine was united, albeit under Soviet rule. Countless of Ukrainian nationalists, as well as other alleged enemies, were targeted by the Soviet NKVD. Many were executed, and many more were deported. Ukrainian collaboration with the Germans started before the German invasion of the USSR. Many OUN members came to live in German-occupied Poland. Now in 1940 there was a split within the OUN. From now on there was the more moderate wing, the OUN-M, led by Andrei Melnik, and the radical faction, the OUN-B, which was led by Stepan Bandera. Two Ukrainian Axis formations were set up in German-occupied Poland. I'm talking about the Nachtigall and the Roland Battalions. Why did Ukrainians join these battalions? Well, as said before, they were from the OUN. They were nationalists and they wanted to restore an independent Ukraine. Now, in hindsight, it's very naive to say, to choose Germany as an ally to liberate your country. But back then, they saw the USSR as the occupier of their lands. And it basically came down to the simple phrase of the enemy is my friend. Besides, the Germans gave them uniforms and equipment. So let's take a look at the IDs of the OUN-B. This here is an example of a resolution that was read during OUN-B Congress in April 1941. Jews in the USSR are the most devoted supporters of the ruling Bolshevik regime and the avant-garde of Muscovite imperialism. The anti-Jewish mood of the Ukrainian masses is being exploited by the Muscovite Bolshevik government in order to distract their attention from the true cause of the hardships and to direct them to carry out pogroms against the Jews. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists struggles against the Jews as props of the Moscow Bolshevik regime, while at the same time it makes the popular masses aware that Moscow is the main enemy. So what we read here is very interesting, because the OUN-B makes a distinction between the Jews and Bolshevik Moscow. So they're not really advocating the myth of Judeo-Bolshevism, but make no mistake, they for sure were anti-Semitic. As was stated in a later section on minorities, Jews are to be isolated, dismissed from positions, in order to avoid sabotage, although more so Russians, Muscovites, and Poles. If there would be an unavoidable need to leave a Jew, e.g. in the economic apparatus, place one of our militiamen over him and liquidate him for the slightest infraction. Assimilation of the Jews is excluded. Anti-Semitism and the murder of Jews was nothing new for the Ukrainians. During the War of Independence, the Ukrainian People's Army carried out anti-Jewish pogroms, as well as the Whites and to a lesser extent the Reds. Now this time Ukrainian nationalists, they helped the Nazis with hunting down Jews and killing them, either by bullets or later as a camp guard. So apart from nationalism, also anti-Semitism was a reason for Ukrainians to join the Germans. Do notice that the current state of Israel has recognized more than 2,500 citizens of Ukraine as righteous among the nations for sheltering Jews during the war. On the 22nd of June 1941, the Germans had invaded the USSR. On the 30th, they entered a city that had different names, either Lemberg, Lvov, or Lviv. This city used to be a Polish cultural center, also a Ukrainian one. It was fought over during the Polish-Ukrainian War of 1919, where the Poles emerged victorious, and thus Lvov became a part of the Second Polish Republic. Today the city is known as Lviv and located in western Ukraine and a hotbed for Ukrainian nationalism. Okay, back to the summer of 1941. Among the first Axis troops that entered this city was the Nachtigall Battalion, as well as other Ukrainian nationalists, among which Stepan Bandera. Despite being forbidden by the Nazis to do so, he had to stay in occupied Poland. On the same day, Bandera issued the Act of Restoration of the Ukrainian State, as he proclaimed. The newly established Ukrainian state will collaborate closely with National Socialist Greater Germany, which under the direction of its leader Adolf Hitler is creating a new order in Europe and the world and is helping the Ukrainian people to free itself from Moscow's occupation. Why did Bandera think this one-sided proclamation of an independent Ukraine would be any success? Well, he had hoped for a similar situation that had occurred in former Yugoslavia, where shortly after the Axis invasion kicked off, the not-so-independent state of Croatia was established. Bandera's plan backfired, as the Germans had no intention of establishing an autonomous Ukraine. And worse, the Germans started to doubt if the OUN-B was reliable. Bandera was arrested and spent most of the war incarcerated. Many other followers were shot, and soon the OUN was in conflict with Germany. See, the German plans for Eastern Europe were way different than for the Balkans, as was written in Hitler's book Mein Kampf. Eastern Europe was to be colonized by the Germanic races, so there was no way the Germans would ever recognize an independent Ukraine, which they ironically did in the last months of the war, but by then they were driven out of the region and basically tried to rally all the support they could get. And then there was also the Nazi Alfred Rosenberg, who was a Baltic German, and he envisioned a series of client states to undermine Soviet rule, but he lost the political contest to Himmler. And as for Yugoslavia, well, the Germans initially had no plans to invade this kingdom, as Regent Paul eventually signed the Tripartite Pact, but he was overthrown by Serbian military leaders shortly after, who distanced themselves from the Axis, and thus Hitler vowed to destroy Yugoslavia. And therefore he gave the Croatians limited self-rule, but for the Ukrainians there was to be no self-rule. The Germans established Reichskommissariat Ukraine. Do notice that Eastern Galicia, former southeastern Poland, current Western Ukraine, was not a part of this, but became part of the general government region within German-occupied Poland. The southwest of Ukraine was transferred to Romanian administration. Now initially, many Ukrainians welcomed the Germans, not only those living in the west, but also those living in central and eastern Ukraine, as the population remembered the horrors of famine and collectivization, as well as the ban on religion. Some expected that National Socialism would bring true socialism. Others simply hoped for improved living standards. With Soviet salaries insufficient to buy even a pair of shoes, it was not difficult to nourish false hopes and imagine that the European Germans would make life better for the population they were liberating from Moscow's control. Many remembered the German occupation of Ukraine in 1918, where conditions were way better than later under Stalin. Many hoped for the restoration of the Ukrainian state, as was the case in 1918, where the Central Powers established a puppet government led by Pavlo Skoropadsky. These hopes were soon dashed. Many were enslaved by the Germans. Close to 2.2 million were apprehended and sent to work in Germany in 1942 and 43. Many died of malnutrition, disease, and allied bombing of the factories where they worked. Thousands of peasants who refused to help the Germans were hanged as an example. Also those who were suspected of partisan activity, and hundreds of villages were obliterated to encourage good behavior from the rest. Tens of thousands more died because of starvation, because the Germans deliberately blocked the food going to the cities. Some Ukrainians served in police battalions where they had to perform guard duties or to fight against the partisans. Reason for them to join was pragmatic. They needed a job. And this here is an important thing to keep in mind during times of war where ideology plays a big part. Many are not concerned with ideology. Many are concerned with survival. And this is shown by the following example. On the 6th of November 1943, a 49-year-old Lieutenant General Nikita Khrushchev, future Soviet leader, entered Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. He approached the old opera house which survived the war. A screaming man came running towards him. "I am the only Jew left. I am the only Jew in Kyiv who is still alive. I have a Ukrainian wife and she kept me hidden in the attic. She fed me and took care of me." Soon more people emerged from their hiding places and welcomed Khrushchev and the Red Army. The soldiers of the regime, for whom many in the summer of 1941 had wished nothing but defeat, now returned as saviors. It was not so much what the Soviets did after their return, but what the Germans had done during the occupation that changed the attitude of those who survived, leading them to welcome the Red Army soldiers not only as victors but also as liberators. Those who thought otherwise, including a good part of the Ukrainian intellectual elite, had left with the Germans. Among those who thought otherwise were members of the UPA, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. More on this formation in the future. If you'd like to learn more about Ukrainian collaboration during the Second World War, you want to have an overview of all the pro-Axis Ukrainian formations that existed, well, you can click right here. Consider becoming a patron so I can make better, cooler, and more awesome content for you. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.